You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready.
All right. Well, our first album is going to be a first-timer on Coming the Stacks. It is Herbie Hancock, Headhunters from 1973. I bet you didn't think we were going to be doing any more jazz, but we are. Before Josh goes ahead and gives us the first take here, it'll go Josh, Matt, and myself on this one. Matt, why don't you run the numbers for us?
So this Herbie Hancock's Headhunters comes in at number 254 on Rolling Stone's list. In Best Ever Albums, we almost covered this in the 1970s. It's 108 currently, number 12 in 1973, number 464 of all time, and it is Herbie Hancock's top rated album on Best Ever Albums.
Now, before I kick to Josh here, I have to say that while I know Herbie Hancock's name, I'm woefully unfamiliar with his music. My two pop culture touch points, or three, were basically the fact that he's constantly mentioned in terms of sampling for hip-hop, the Rocket video from the 80s, which was like a person's workshop with the machines going all over the place, which is a pretty infamous album that used to show up on those top 100 music videos of all time, and of course the immortal Snoop Dogg line, "I'd be like Herbie and hand you a cock." So, I mean, those are the three areas where I was aware.
Wait, what was the Def Leppard? Would you say the Def Leppard, the Rocket video? What?
No.
What was the second thing you said?
Hancock himself had a song called Rocket.
Oh, my
R-O-C-K-I-T.
mind went immediately to Def Leppard's Rocket video. I thought that's what you were talking about.
You are completely incorrect on that.
I am.
It's definitely Herbie Hancock. Yep.
The other thing I think of is Tommy Boy, when he does the answer that John Adams and Blank Hancock signed the decker, and he's like, "Oh, he wrote Herbie Hancock." That was actually the first time I heard Herbie Hancock was from Tommy Boy.
So Herbie Hancock deserves a lot better from us than the patchwork pop culture references that we have. And, that's as good a place as any for us to kick it with the one person who has not weighed in with kitschy pop culture references. Josh, I'm going to start the clock right now. We try to keep it between 15 and 20 and fail miserably on these segments, but I'm going to start the clock anyway. Thoughts on Herbie Hancock, Headhunters?
Well, I'm glad we brought the jazz back because this album rules. It's like a combination jazz fusion with funk and electronica, and also the album cover rules as well. It's really fun. But yeah, it's right out the gate.
Will you describe that for the people so that they can know who may not have in front of them?
Sure. It's like Herbie Hancock in front of I assume Herbie Hancock in front of a piano keyboard, and he's got a big like fake face that's like a cutout of, I don't know, a rabbit or something weird.
It's the original emoji, Josh, I think is what it is.
Okay.
They're like a Pac-Man-esque, Pac-Man mixed with like a bull weevil.
Yeah, that's a good one. And then the surrounding band is behind him. But yeah, it really stands out. This is a good week for album covers, actually. But yeah, back to the album, it starts out right at the gate. The bass is strong on this album. All of the instrumentation is really strong. You've got strong funk grooves. I'm sure that the first track is Chameleon. I'm sure that is sampled on a rap song because it sounds so familiar to me, and I never listened to this album before. But these are so there's 4 tracks on the album. Approximately like 15 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, 9 minutes each. And the long songs they're expansive, but they're good. They take you on a journey, and they seem to end numerous times, but then they'll fade back in or recall something from earlier in the song. And these are just really great tracks to vibe to. 3 of the 4, the first 3 are the ones I really like too, and the last one, Vein Melter, is kind of a slower song, so it doesn't have as much of the upbeat funk. Another thing is there's a lot of unusual or instrumentation that we haven't heard on this album before. There on Watermelon Man, the second track, there is like pan flute or something, and used in this really great way with like a repeating I don't know, like phrase or sounds, people making sounds, and it just really, all of these songs are kind of like brainworms in a way, and they get you, and you want to like move to them, and there's a lot of repetition throughout the album as well, and that really draws you in as well. So those are kind of my initial thoughts. I just really kind of liked where this was going. I mean, to be fair, I was listening in a car, so I wasn't like paying attention as much to the time where we were in the song or when the tracks changed. But there's a lot going on in this album, and for one listen,
cold listen, hot ride is what Josh is doing right there.
Yeah. So, what'd you think, Matt?
I liked it too. I recognized the first song immediately because that was a song that I played when I was in jazz band.
Oh wow!
And I never knew it was a Herbie Hancock song, and I actually thought, man, did he like cover this from somebody? Because I was used to hearing it and playing it in just a regular band without any effects or synths or anything like that. And no, it turns out that I looked at it and this is the original. So, but yeah, it was very funky. I love that bass line. And it's, very electronic. So this is, this definitely sounds different than the jazz that we listened before because the electric stuff, even compared to Miles Davis, who was doing electric stuff, this seems even more so. This seems really electric, like a lot more synth, a lot more kind of like, this is like a little bit going into the Stevie Wonder type thing. I'm like, is that the Tonto synth in there even? It probably
it's that ARP synth. Yes.
I mean, it's kind of all, it kind of falls under the same umbrella for me, but very, very funky opening track. Really liked it. And I like how it stopped, kind of midway through and then went to a different direction. And I still liked that as well. So the keys kind of went a little less produced, went to just a traditional electric piano. But great opening track there. Really liked it. And I knew Watermelon Man, the second track, because a friend of mine put it on a playlist recently. So I knew that already. And Josh, you're right. That one of the cool things about that is it starts off with like just some whistling. It's almost like he's playing I was getting kind of almost like an empty, beer bottle or something. You're kind of like blowing the top of that thing. Yeah. But it's one of those things where they start off doing like one thing and they add a little bit here and then they add another thing. And next thing you know, there's like 15 different parts going on, and it goes into it's just a different direction than you think that it would. And then it has this really cool guitar part, this very, this like kind of like staccato, just notes that they're playing on the guitar, and it just fits in so well. So, very, very cool song there. Very unique. Lots of offbeat drumming, which I like as well. So I definitely, the first two tracks I liked the most. I like those more. And those were kind of more of a funkier type sound. And the second part was still good. It's just I didn't think it was as good as the first half. And the fourth track kind of stood out a little bit more as more of a kind of a, I don't know, there was more space. It's almost like the keyboards were trying to like mimic strings. I thought that was kind of an interesting sound that the keyboards were going for, but it's more of a relaxing type song, which is fine. The third track was kind of a little bit all over the place. It starts a little bit more traditional, but I got into a little bit more avant-garde free jazz kind of stuff. There's a sax part on there that was a little bit reminiscent of like an Eric Dolphy or a John Coltrane. Very fast, not really funky at all on that song or the last song either. But yeah, strong album here. I did see also that this was like the first jazz album that went platinum. So I knew that this was a very high selling jazz album, very popular. So thumbs up. I liked it. It was kind of nice to have a little bit more of a. I hesitate to say modern, but a more modern take on jazz than what we were listening to before, which was a lot of that stuff is a little bit more traditional. This is definitely throwing a more of a 70s electronic vibe into it, but done very well.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm going to kind of tip my hand here a little bit. What I've been trying to do this week is the first time that I officially tried to read and get context after I made sure that I had a solidified hot take that had nothing to do with what I read. Does that make sense, guys? So like what I'm going to try to do in my segments is I'm going to try to explain like what I learned in terms of tying stuff to what you've done and different stuff, as well as present my novel take. Sound like a good idea? So when I was writing my initial take, the thing with all four of the albums this week that was amazing is all of them sound like a harken back to the past. They sound of the moment, and they also sound a lot like what the future was going to be. It was amazing. All four of them. That was my vibe on all of them. And Herbie Hancock, the first thing I wrote was, God, this sounds like like what Miles Davis was trying to do at the end of the 60s and the early 70s, and sort of like taking free jazz but making it more blended to the R&B at the time that we've been listening to, with a little bit of electronic music that was going. So it was like Miles Davis meets electronic experimental music meets sort of R&B soul funk of 1973. And it's funny because as I read about Herbie Hancock, he basically was in Miles Davis' band. He broke away from him right before they went into the experimental period that Miles Davis was doing, and so he's heavily influenced. So that would be the first thing that was very interesting. He also was heavily influenced by Sly and the Family Stone's sound at the time. In fact, even one of these songs on here was designed to. It's like, well, yeah, God, that sounds exactly like it. Then
well, the third song is called Sly.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Literally, it's the third song is basically an homage to him. And then you hear that ARP synthesizer all over the place, and I'm like, well, there's the Stevie Wonder connection. And it's funny because, you know, we'll talk about in the Isley Brothers, I'm sure, but it's all over that Isley Brothers album as well that we listened to. So it was kind of funny because you're like, man, I have these notes, and I must be getting a little bit better, because all of the stuff that's in here, without me having any idea about Hancock's background, it starts to hit, and I'm no genius. It's more like you can see stuff blending together. Matt also touched on some things. The guitar tone and the guitar sound was it stood out to me, and Herbie Hancock was playing it. It's the Fender Rhodes guitar, Matt, and it actually was recommended for him to play by Miles Davis. So it's a very unique sounding guitar that... excuse me, I apologize. The Fender Rhodes is the piano. I apologize. The Fender Rhodes is the piano he plays that was recommended for him by Miles Davis. He's also, though, the bass guitar that Paul Jackson is playing stands out. I'm sorry, I'm mixing him up with my Isley Brothers thing. So Fender Rhodes piano that Herbie Hancock is playing. That's all over this album. Matt and Josh also mentioned there's a lot of sounds on this album, and I can tell that in trying to blend what I learned with my own take, it's kind of being lost here a little bit. But there's a guy on this album, guys, Bill Summers. And God, I'm going to mispronounce a whole bunch of terms in a row, but Bill Summers played a lot of stuff on this album. He played the agogo. It sounds like when Kenan Thompson does the Big Poppy, right? I'm about to sound like that here as I go through some of these. Yeah. The agogo, the balafone, I believe, which is a xylophone. The beer bottle, Matt, so you heard that correctly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The kabasa, which is like a steel ball chain that you shake. Not quite a maranga, but there are congos. There's the gankoji, the Gankogui, which is like a bell. The Hinduwu, which is another like pygmy music sound. The log drum, the shakir, which is like a maraca. The surdo, which is a different type of drum, and the tambourine. This gentleman was credited with all of them. There's also alto flute, which I think that was played by Benny Maupin, which I think is what Josh heard. There's synthesizer, there's Fender Rhodes, there's saxophone, there's bass, there's marimbula. Yeah. All kinds of stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's all kinds of shit on this album and you can hear it, because unlike Josh, I listen to it on headphones and stuff explodes all over. This is one that I will go back and listen to later, because I only felt like I got about 30% of the album in the cold listen. Some other things that stood out to me in my initial cold listen hot take, though, there's a lot of hi-hats all over this album on the drums, especially on Chameleon. Holy cow. Like the drumming, I know Matt is describing it as like offbeat drumming. The thing that stood out to me is more like the hi-hats. They're all over the place on this, and that's kind of unique. It's like a funk album blended with jazz as well, which is really not a take that we've listened to at this point. You know,
no jazz funk,
no jazz funk, yep. And then the standout track for me is Watermelon Man, which is this cool track. It's got this almost like meditative sound at the beginning and the end of it that it brings back, kind of like what we've talked about with what Pharoah Sanders did.
Yes.
You know, and it's very similar to that, but then it goes off in this funky direction and then it ends with the meditative stuff. It just hit me for some reason perfectly. It just was really a cool sound. I don't know what the vibe was for it, and I'd be interested to explore in later listens what that vibe is. But yeah, I really like this album. I did know that Herbie Hancock, from that video Rocket and just a little bit about him, was a guy that was a genre bender and loved electronics, and you can definitely tell because he's there's nothing he doesn't fuck with, as they say on this album. You know, he's all over the place playing everything, and the result is a album that I'm sure got picked to the bone by. It's funny because we're doing both the Isley Brothers and Herbie Hancock, which a lot of people say those two along with Diana Ross is like, you know, 90% of hip hop in the 90s, right? The samples. So, and two of them are on this episode, but I'm gonna have to look and clean that stack of hip hop samples. But yeah, I really like this one. There's a lot going on. If you are someone who likes jazz, if you are someone who likes R&B or soul, if you're like someone who likes electronic music, there's going to be a lot here for you. And I think there's very few people that are going to be turned off to this. It's a more accessible version of musics like electronic music and avant-garde music and jazz that sometimes can be hard to access for people, but it's a nice little gateway drug on all of them.
Yeah, I think it's bringing the accessibility points crucial because I think it's bringing a dance element in with the funk as well, and I think it makes jazz more appealing on some level and less feels like work at times listening to this album. It just kind of flows over you, and you can pick out different things as you listen to it.
And one thing I just found out, Josh, in terms of cleaning that up, I pulled off something just to make sure that I had the notes from All Music is what I use for my quick takes on this for some information. They actually described the album cover. It was designed by a gentleman by the name of Victor Moscoso, Moscoso. Now, from now on, when I don't know how to pronounce something, sometimes I haven't done this, but I'm just going to spell it out so I at least give the guy credit, you know. So Moscoso. It is based on the African, oh my goodness, Kipple, Kple, new word, Kple again, mask of the Boali tribe of the Ivory Coast. So, God, I apologize to all of the words that I mispronounced right there, but I did want to give a little bit of context right there. So it is a mask from a tribe, and it is a traditional dance and masquerade mask.
Yeah, I mean, you described all of those basically like world instrument musics or percussion from around the world, and I don't really get a world music vibe on this, so he just did a really good job of fusing all of that and incorporating that into his music.
I definitely got that on Watermelon Man, though. Like with all those, like the yelps and the stuff like that. It seemed very much like it's almost like a tribal kind of a thing that he's doing there.
Yeah, that that meditative part. Yeah, it's hard to. I think it's though. It doesn't. There's a fine. How can I put this? Like, because if the world music is your music, right, then there's nothing heavy-handed. It's what you sound like.
Well, world music is so reductive too, right?
Right. Well, that's what I mean. And it's like, can we say that Bob Marley sounds like reggae or because he is that, right? But I think what Herbie Hancock does is he blends a whole bunch of different sounds, and he's not a true insider on any of these things, but he's not a true outsider on some either. But he's not too heavy-handed with any one style, and as a result, it really blends together, if that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, this is jazz fusion. I mean, this is like when we talk about jazz. Well, and
it's much. I would say this is also much more accessible than the stuff Miles Davis was doing. This is much more grounded in great. And the funk is probably a big part of that, but just the great bass lines, it's more melodic, it's catchier. It's easier to find something here. Whereas the Miles Davis stuff is like more avant-garde, more experimental, more artsy, if you will.
Well, I'll be honest with you guys. I know he played in Miles Davis' band, and he was obviously influenced by him, so that's the touch point. But I saw a lot of Alice Coltrane on this album, and I saw a lot of Pharoah Sanders on this album. Yeah. I even saw a little bit of what Eric Dolphy was doing, and it's not as chaotic as the Eric Dolphy stuff, but the different sounds were there and the energy, and then the Pharoah Sanders with the meditative sounds and the repetition and the African beats, and then the Alice Coltrane stuff came from the East, right? Heavily influenced by India, but same idea with the different instrumentation, and so I saw bits and pieces of lots of stuff that we've covered, along with good old-fashioned funk and even some of the avant-garde stuff that we've been getting into a lot more recently. So it was an interesting bitches brew, if you will, guys. You like that?
Yeah.
Of different sounds, yeah. So,
yeah.
Any other final takes, guys?
No, I mean, it's the one listen, you can only pull so much out on the...
Yeah, that's why I want to try to bring a little bit of the context here for that, because Herbie Hancock is still making music to this day, guys, in 2021, and he's a figure kind of like a David Bowie or a Bob Dylan, and that they're just like they're constantly making music and reinventing themselves a little bit, being curious with trends. I mean, Herbie Hancock throughout the 70s was messing around with disco. In the 80s, he was doing electronic music and a little bit of rock, and expanding his jazz. He's always, he's always on the fringes of kind of what's going on, and certainly on the forefront for years he was in terms of electronic equipment. I feel like we've been on a stretch here of people that are real equipment junkies, right? With Tom Scholz and Herbie Hancock and Eno and people like that Stevie Wonder, that really that was a big part of what they like to do with the music too. So,
well, it's almost like the technology at this time has been able to catch up to the artist's vision in some way, or it allows them to do what they want to do,
or help to create a new vision that you weren't thinking of, and then you could see, But we saw a little bit out of the '60s with the Moog synthesizer and the tape, the double tracking on the tapes. Frank Zappa was kind of. And Captain Beefheart, there were people delving into that stuff then, but now it seems like the technology accelerated in the 70s to really give you a lot of stuff. And we didn't even talk about Todd Rundgren, who actually produced the New York Dolls album that we're going to do. How about that? So it all ties together.
Well, it's almost, I guess the important thing to remember too is this is like the start of digital versus like analog. And I think that is a big difference.
Well, and do you want to explain a little bit of what you mean by that, or do you want to go into greater context for those that might not imagine a world that didn't have digital?
Well, I mean, when I think of digital versus analog, I think of like physical movement of things and machines versus like creation of sounds digitally, if that makes sense. So like all the synths and stuff, that would be considered digital. But when you're talking about double tracking and with tapes and stuff, that's actually like physically rewriting the tape and stuff in different ways. I guess it's just in my head, it's just easier to do stuff digitally.
But they didn't have digital recording then. Wasn't it still analog? It's like early 70s.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I'm no historian. I just meant in terms of instrumentation, I think a lot of this stuff is digital. Well, I mean, all the electronic stuff has to be, I would think, digital.
Right, but I mean, there's more of an electronic, nature to it. But when they're actually recording, they're still doing tapes and stuff. It's still tracking now. And now you do it digitally. You're using computer software to actually record. But the instruments are definitely more electronic and I guess produced in that way.
Yeah, I mean, what about the Pink Floyd album? I would imagine that had some digital production with all the tricks and stuff and things that they were doing in terms of, creating the different sounds. And although you said too that electronic running track was actually created, they played that, right? Didn't you say that?
Yes. They all played like they got to they weren't even instruments. They're just like all this like weird. It almost looks like operator boards and stuff like that with knobs and things like that. But the recording of it, the actual let's make a recording of this and play it back was still done analog, was still on tape.
Okay.
Anyway,
so maybe we're in this not weird, but this middle period where everything is both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm doing a little bit of on the fly research right now, and one of the things that they mentioned between analog and digital that we can kind of go is the idea that in digital there's a finite 0 or 1 sound, whereas in analog there isn't, and that's that idea of that polish sound that you get. Remember we talk about like how an album sounds polished. That's kind of what we get. But here you go. The first U.S. digitally recorded LP of popular music with vocals, "Bop Till You Drop" by guitarist Ry Cooder, was released in July 11th, 1979, guys. Okay. So that is, according to this, on a quick.
I was way off.
So, well, I mean, it's the end of the 70s, so it is the end of the 70s. But you can see, once again, that technology heading to that. You know,
Yeah.
you're seeing breakthroughs coming quick. It's almost like the internet in the 90s, where it went from almost none to suddenly it's in everybody's house and there's Wi-Fi in a span of like 15 years. It's kind of, that's what I think the 70s might be for recording techniques. So, yep. But that's another conversation right there. I'll leave for me, strong recommend for this album. I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, same. Strong recommend.
As did I.